Katie.
Oh, crap. Sorry. Now I'm having problems. Hang on.
Man,
I'm sorry.
That's okay.
now I really want that to be the opening of the interview.
What's up, everyone? Welcome to Hollywood Unveiled, where we pull back the curtain on the Hollywood entertainment industry and get to know the people behind the magic. I'm Jake.
And I'm Logan.
And Logan, our guest, has been making sounds for movies both domestically and internationally since 2008. She has received 2 Emmy Awards and the nomination for her work on Stranger Things, and an Emmy nomination for her supervising work on Hotel Transylvania 4, Transformania, along with several other awards in her field. Currently, she works as both a supervising sound editor and a sound designer on an eclectic number of movies and TV shows, such as Oscar-nominated Flamin' Hot, the sci-fi show Star Trek Discovery, and Strange New Worlds, comedies such as The Unbearable Weight of Massive Talent, and the McG-directed Family Switch, and is currently editing on the next chapter of the Lion King saga, Mufasa. Logan, our guest is sound supervisor, editor, designer, Katie Halliday.
Yeah. Heck yeah.
And she's a total badass.
No, she rocks. Like, sound is one of those where it's an underappreciated part of the film development process. Unlike visual effects or makeup, like, everybody knows what things are supposed to sound like.
And if you're doing your job right, you may not even notice in many cases.
Yes. So it is a hard thing to get right, but you have to get it right.
And dude, I learned so much from this, actually. Like, she brought up things that make total sense, but then you just never really think about it when you're thinking about the process of sound design. Just showing just what level of expertise she has in this was really incredible.
Well, quit teasing them. Let's just jump into it.
Okay, here's Katie Halliday. Take 3. Katie, how you doing?
I'm good. I'm very good.
I've known you for a while now. We've worked together technically, peripherally from time to time on a couple of similar or same projects here and there. But man, you've blown up. Stranger Things, Hotel Transylvania, Flamin' Hot, Star Trek. That show's just been killing it for me. Where did this all start? What got you interested in, first of all, movies, sound design, or just what were your influences?
As soon as people say that to me, I immediately say Jurassic Park, because there's like a direct line back to when I saw it in theaters, and it just like blew my mind. And at the time, I was too young to understand what it was about it that blew my mind. But it was the whole movie. It wasn't just the sound, but the sound was so unique and just on a different level. And even if you go back to that year and you look through the catalog of movies that year, even, it's like it's just its own thing. It's just so head and shoulders above everything else. And I say that, with love to everything else that year, but it's such a special movie to me, and it's always been one I circle back to, even when I'm working on sound design stuff and I'm just sort of thinking about something that might not be remotely dinosaur related. I'll just put it on in the background and just have it percolating in my head so that I can, get those creative juices flowing. So that's definitely been the biggest influence on me as far as everything, interest in film, interest in sound, all of it. So
when you got into sound, that's the area I want to be in out the gate, or was it filmmaking in general, or was it even music that brought you to sound, that brought you to movies?
It was music in some ways. When I went to film school, I was actually geared up to go to University for Music in Toronto, and I had applied at all the different schools and I had been accepted, but there was one program that really stuck out for me, and something in my gut was like, just, you got to go do that. And it was the film program at Humber College, because it felt like there was just, I don't know, like I just couldn't see myself being like a music teacher or even being in a university setting. I'm just so like, my ADHD mind can't like, I have to like apply myself to things. And that whole program is like practical knowledge. So everything you do, it's like, all right, you're going to learn about this camera and then you're going to use this camera. And so it cemented things in your brain in a different way than reading books did. So that definitely felt like it was my speed. And so when I got into film school, I was like, I'm going to be a director or a camera operator. Like, I didn't even think about getting into sound, even though I had spent so much of my childhood doing music. And then, of course, as soon as I started doing sound, it was the thing that not only did I love it, but everybody else in my class was like, Katie's the sound person now. So they would give me all their stuff, you know. So it just sort of, it as soon as I went down that road, it just sort of went, and I just kind of went with it. And you know, it's been 16 years now since I graduated, and I still love it, which is nice.
It sounds like you kind of fell into sound in some respects, almost like you found
Kind
something
of.
that you love. And like you said,
Yeah.
like the other students are like, oh, she's a sound, you give her the sound stuff to do.
Yeah.
What sort of training in, say, the tools that you're using today, Pro Tools, whatnot, what have you, what sort of training did you have? Was it all in the college, or was there a lot of it just kind of self-learned? Where did that come from?
Oh, it was the college was a lot of it was just like sort of getting you started.
Mm-hmm.
Everything I learned was once I got into the field. Like all of the really major stuff was when I got into the field, because it was it's one of, you know, a lot. I feel like this is true of a lot of film fields in film. It really is about your experiences, because you draw off of your experiences to inform yourself on whatever project it is that you're doing. And so, like, you know, the longer I do this, the more sort of a Rolodex of experiences I can be like, oh yeah, I did a movie where I did this kind of thing. How did I do that? You know, it's a movie with trains. Like, how did I cut the trains in this one? And just kind of use that to springboard off of. So I definitely think like 90% of my learning has been on the job, and I'm still learning all the time. And that's one of the things I love about this work, is that it's every movie I've ever worked on has its own challenges. And so it's different every time I do it. It's like starting a new job every time. That can be kind of stressful, but for the most part, I love it, because it just gives me a chance to change directions. And, you know, at one point I'm working on animation, and then the next I'm working on horror, and then the next I'm working on a family film. And it's really like, sometimes it can give you whiplash, but it is just nice to have those options of like really delving into very, very different genres and approaches for sound. But yeah, I'd say the majority of what I've learned has been just by doing it, just by, you know, having the experiences, even if it's just stuff that I do myself. Like I think when I first moved here and we had first met, I wasn't working as much as I am now. And I would just take scenes from movies I liked or trailers or whatever and just recut them on my own, because I wasn't going to be cutting stuff like that, you know, at least at that moment. And so it just gave me an opportunity to give those things a try and kind of see how my chops are with them and stuff like that.
That sounds like an awesome exercise for anybody who, say, is coming up and needs
absolutely.
some kind of hands-on experience, right?
Yeah.
Do you include any of that in like reels? Does that sort of thing help you get a job or land a job or anything like that?
You definitely can. It helps because if you feel like you don't have like a demo reel that's got the full breadth of your talents, then making it yourself, I mean, one, it shows initiative, but two, it also gives you a chance to actually show what you're capable of. So yeah, absolutely. I know a lot of people will do that, where as long as they make it clear, it's not like, this is a recut. Like, I did not do this original, you know, I didn't cut the original Jurassic Park. That's not me. So as long as that's clear, it's fine, especially for those kinds of things where it's not public consumption. It's just like basically a job application. That's totally fine. Yeah. And it just gives whoever you're sending it to a chance to see a variety of stuff as well. So I've done that a bunch. Just sent it to people that I look up to, or you know, whatever. Just be like, hey, I cut this trailer. What can you give me some feedback? And you know, I think it makes a big impact because it shows that even when you're not working, you're like trying to figure out how to be good at your job.
Now, you were talking like, you were coming up through school, working on, recutting some of the audio for these established scenes. You hit your first professional gig.
Mm-hmm.
So how did that gig come up? How did it go? And what were kind of your preconceived notions of what it was going to be going into it?
When I first got hired at a studio in Toronto, I got hired as sort of a staff editor, like a full-time employee of that company. And so they sort of threw you on whatever shows they needed you to work on at that time. And so one of the first shows that I ever cut, it wasn't the very first, but it was like maybe the second or third, was one of the Saw movies. They had a bunch of reels that they needed backgrounds for. And my supervisor was like, all right, take a crack at this and let me know how it goes. I was like, okay. So that was not expected. I wasn't expecting to just literally get thrown right into it like that. But I definitely think that it was a lot. There was a lot I hadn't learned in school that I had to learn quickly on the job. And just like specific things like to feature films, which I hadn't done a feature film because I was in school. So I had done shorts and things like that. So it's like a whole different workflow and, it's a different beast. I was very surprised by the breadth of this, like sound design and stuff like that, like how involved it was, because I kind of knew that from watching like behind the scenes stuff and things like that, but they just sort of boil it down for you to like make it palatable for people to like, a behind the scenes thing that somebody's watching and, just somebody that's not associated with film,
At this point, have you ever done like the Universal Studios backlot tours where they do check out how we do the Foley and all that stuff?
Yeah.
Was any of that kind of in the back of your mind when you started doing this stuff?
A little bit, yeah. Actually, it's funny you say that. Here at Warner Brothers, I was here for a TV show a few years back, and me and the mixer had a couple hours of downtime, and so we were like, let's go check out, because Warner Brothers has like a tour, and they have a couple of like tourist spots you can go look at, like their archives and stuff. It's really cool. But it was really funny because they have this one little exhibit that's like for sound. It's like feature sound or whatever. And we're like, we got to watch this.
Yeah.
And so we went and we sat down and we were looking at this like old console from like 1965 or something. We're like, oh, a state of the art, like it's.
Let me guess. It was a clip of Gravity?
It was a clip of Gravity, yes.
I used to work there. I've given that speech many times.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
That's awesome. And it was not a bad explanation. Like I said, I was going to say, for people who have no concept of what they're looking at or listening to, it's a good way to do it. But it's also really funny watching those things when you're in the field, because it's like, that's like, you're seeing like this much of the iceberg, and it's like, I'm rambling. I don't remember the question.
No,
that's what this show is
great.
about. It's okay. You're good.
All right.
I'll ramble some here because you're talking about that, the tip of the iceberg from the backlot tours. I feel the same when I do the like Universal or whatever. They do the VFX. Here's a green screen and here's a guy in mocap, and I'm like, that's not how the mocap works. But okay, it's close, and that's it. And the green screen really requires a little bit more of this and
But it's like, it's like, all right, I get it. People are they're going to lose the whole audience if they start going into all of that.
And those same shows got me interested in this too. So it's,
And it's funny on the sound side, because I think the thing that we get so much is Foley. People think everything is Foley because it's the one department in sound that has a very visual element, because like most of what we do is just like clicking on a keyboard and looking at a screen and like pushing faders. It's
asset
not really
libraries.
that interesting. Yeah, it's but it's not like super interesting from a visual standpoint, whereas Foley is like, you see them, you can see somebody walking on the screen and then you see them walking along with it, and you're like, oh, okay. It's a quick connection. So people always think that that's what all of sound is sometimes.
Yeah.
And it's like, oh, you do? Like, what do you do? I'm like, oh, I do, sound effects, sound design. Like, oh, Foley. I'm like, no. No. not at all. But
Not all of it.
not all of it. Yeah. It's a very important part of the sound process, but it's not the only part of the sound process.
Yeah. Now, I will ask with that because, like, peeling back the curtain a little bit, we like to get some photos that we can kind of use. And I'm sure this is where Jake will edit in the photo that I'm talking about. But there's one that is you, like, primed over a pumpkin with a boxing glove.
Yeah.
I can only assume that's you getting ready to get a sound.
Punch the shit out of a pumpkin. Yes,
exactly.
I did.
Yeah.
Punching Pumpkins. That's the next band that Katie's starting.
Yeah. So, like, speaking of the DVD bonus features, like, I remember when I was a kid, I got fascinated with Foley with the bonus features on Men in Black 2. Because they had a little featurette that was like, hey, here's how we do Frank the Pug. Here's how we do these sound effects, all of those. So I'm curious, if you've done any of the Foley stuff, at the very least, punching the shit out of some pumpkins. Yeah. What is your favorite sound that you've had a chance to create, or the weirdest item you've used to create a sound?
I didn't record this, but this is actually from the last season of Stranger Things. But I didn't record it, so I don't know if that counts.
If you edited it, you put it together.
You were present for it. I'd say, yeah.
So I actually got a tattoo of this because it became such a meme on the stage with the Duffer Brothers. On the last season, if you guys haven't seen it, or if anyone watching hasn't seen the season, there's a scene in, I believe it's episode 4, where one of the characters is having a flashback of World War II, and he's walking into this house that he accidentally bombed that was a family home. Mm-hmm. And it's something that, like, is recurring. It's haunted him for his whole life. And it's this image of a baby cradle on fire, and there's a baby in the cradle. And so the first time we played it back, the baby was, like, crying. He was very distressed, all that stuff. But one of the things that I do quite often for that show is, once we get to the stage portion of everything, me and Matt and Ross will give me notes, and I'll go and do them on the spot. And so we watched through that, and Matt was like, it all sounds amazing. I have this one note about the baby. It just sounds like it's hungry. It doesn't sound like it's on fire. And we want it to sound like a baby on fire. And I was like, okay. It's like, so think more disturbing. Like, it should sound like a human, but maybe more animalistic. And I was like, okay, I got you. So I went to do my thing, and I had some ideas of what I thought might work. And I stumbled on this recording of a baby gorilla nursing. And it is the most horrific sound. It's like, if you hear it, you would think the baby's, like, being tortured.
Yeah.
So it's like this horrendous scream. And so I was like, that's it. That's the sound. So I put it in. We watch back the episode, and, through the whole episode goes by and it goes to black, and Matt turns around and looks at me. He's like, what was that? I was like, oh, it was a baby gorilla. He's like, a baby gorilla
on fire?
You're so fucked up. You wanted disturbing. Yeah.
I delivered. I don't know what you want from me.
So for the rest of the season, every other playback or whatever, there would be notes, and then either Matt or Ross would be like, oh, can you get a baby gorilla screaming too? That would be great. And so it just became like a joke. So I got, like, a tattoo of a baby gorilla's hand in a cradle that's on fire.
Wow.
Oh, that's amazing.
Wow.
Yeah. Because it got to the point where, like, they were joking about it. They're like, you should get a tattoo of it. I was like, you shouldn't say that to me, because I'm the kind of person.
Don't tempt me.
Yeah, like, don't tell me with a good time.
On a dare, So that was, I think, recently, that's been one of my favorite sounds that I've done in a show, because just the pure horror on the Duffer Brothers' faces when they heard it. They were like, ah. And I know if they get, like, if it bugs them out, then I know it's good, because they're very, like, desensitized.
Well, that's how you win an Emmy. That's how. Yeah, apparently.
That's what I'm going to tell people from now on. That's how I got an Emmy.
What'd you win your Emmy for? Baby gorilla on fire.
Baby gorilla.
Yeah.
I set a baby gorilla on fire.
Yeah.
big
You're
deal.
like, well, I didn't set it on fire.
Okay.
But
Somebody else did. As you know, fine.
Well, let me ask you about the process. When I hear sound design, maybe you could also help clarify too, for those outside of sound design, the difference between sound design and sound editor as well. But when I hear those terms, I usually think post-production. How early do you like to be involved in a production? Do you like to be involved earlier in the process, or do people just come to you at the end and say, my project's done, here you go, work with it?
Yeah. To answer the first question really quick, sound editor is, when you're on a show and you're doing sound effects or anything like that, you're pulling from a library, you're cutting it into the show, all that stuff. Sound designer, they'll usually do that, but they'll also, the main reason that they're called a sound designer is because they go out and record a bunch of original stuff and then they make libraries and all that stuff. So like if you work on a movie with a creature, you go out, you record. I actually just did a bunch of stuff for a show. I don't know if I can talk about it, so I won't. But just go out and record a bunch of stuff and then make a bunch of libraries. And they actually haven't even shot yet. So so that leads into the answering the second question, which is as early as possible. Because if you can get in, even in the script phase, like if the script is done and it's going to production, that's the best time to get in. Because if there's anything in the script that is going to affect sound in some way, which there will be inevitably, even if it's a drama, there's going to be, narratively speaking, not like how they're going to record it and everything, because that's up to the production recordist. But, there's going to be things that it might be invaluable to have a supervisor come in early and say, listen, it would be good to get you these things so you can have them on set, again, just a little bit of what I was just talking about. Like they haven't started shooting yet, but it's a creature. So they really needed to figure out what it's going to sound like. And that's going to inform what it's going to look like to a degree. And so, so when you can get in that early, it just makes everything fuse together more naturally in the post process, because you can then, have more control. And the other nice thing is that I do a lot, and a lot of my contemporaries do, is get in with the picture editor early on so that they can give them whatever they need. So like even if it's like doors, cars, more mundane sounds, all the way to, or background sounds, all city, all that, all the way to like more specific sound design stuff. If you can get that to them while they're cutting, they get used to hearing your stuff. And then they don't, because I'm sure you guys, I think it's a little different in sound, but I'm sure you've got some things in visuals where the director, the picture editor, whoever, they just get used to seeing and hearing the exact same thing over and over again. And so when they see or hear something new, it can be really jarring for them. Even if it's not like necessarily, it could be whatever you did is like, could be way better than whatever they've been hearing, but because they've gotten so used to, it's called temp love in the sound world. They get temp love and they get so used to hearing that for better or worse, those sounds usually end up in the final because they're just so used to hearing it that way. And that is the way that like they've sort of, cut everything together. And so like, you don't really want to get in the way of that process. So the best way to avoid that is to get in super early so you can be part of that process. I have a really hard time. Like I'm a perfectionist in some of the worst ways sometimes because I can't, and I think a lot of my peers are too, because it's really hard to like present things to the client and have them understand this is temp. This is not what you're going to hear in the end, because first impressions are very important. And so quite often we do temp mixes on movies where everything, the show I'm working on right now, we've had 4 temp mixes, and every single time it's had to sound like a final movie, because if it doesn't, then all the notes are like, well, this doesn't sound right. And if it doesn't sound right, it doesn't feel right. And so, you can't really just slap stuff together and then just show a half-baked idea. You really have to like make sure that you're ready to show it to a client when you work in this field, because it's so hard to come back from that. And And I think I did that maybe a little bit more early on in my career where it's like, oh, it's not done yet, giving all these disclaimers. But even with the disclaimers, people are going to judge whatever it is you put in front of them. And then it's really hard to like bring it back from there if they've got this first impression that they were like not really, they're underwhelmed by your work or something. I think it's such an unforgiving medium, sound, that like as far as like if it's off, it's going to throw everything off. Mm-hmm. And that's not where you want to be when you have a client in the room. So, or when you send stuff to a client to watch.
Now, looking at your filmography, how does your process kind of differ when you work on some of the more fantastical projects, things like Stranger Things or Saw or Star Trek, versus more real world stuff like Flamin' Hot or Cheap by the Dozen?
It's definitely a different process. I think it's also like with a lot of that stuff, the bigger the scale and ambition is, usually there's like you're part of a well-oiled machine. Mm-hmm. Stranger Things, I'm part of an incredible team of sound people, but we all kind of do our own things on the show. So it can scatter a little bit in that sense. And people, big shows, this happens a lot where you get compartmentalized into like, oh, it's a period movie with a lot of horses. So this person's going to cut all the horses and this person's going to cut all the carriages. And this, it can get into that kind of pretty easily on those kinds of things where there's just a lot of material to cover and there's just not enough manpower. So you got to like really, bring in a lot of people. But I think that's one of the biggest distinguishing characteristics of working on those shows is like you're usually part of a big team. And I would assume it's probably the same for visual effects because, you have an Avengers movie or something. It's like, 5,000 VFX people, but on like a more dramatic film, it's that is sort of minimalist with visual effects. You don't need as many.
I'll let you know when I get an Avengers movie.
Well, I know even with Stranger Things, I mean, it's nuts. Like the visual effects team is bananas. And and they were working on we were all on a crazy schedule, but I don't know how they did it.
I'm curious. So what is something that might be misunderstood about your department to people who are outside of the field, other than assuming that it's all Foley?
Yes, it's all Foley. I think just the level of work and details and just the scale at which sound operates. Like, I don't think people realize that when they're watching a final movie, it's like maybe 10% of what they originally recorded on set or something like that. I mean, as far as dialogue's concerned, it's probably going to be a bit more than that. But when we're talking about everything else, effects, backgrounds, whatever, most of that stuff has to be redone from scratch and, Foley and everything else. I mean, anytime I've ever talked to anyone about it, it's just so hard to, it's like you kind of have to pick a scene and show them like, this is what it's like without any sound, or this is what it's like just with production sound. And if we're talking about like a big action scene, the production sound is probably not going to be great because they know it's going to get all redone anyways. And then it's like, here's the backgrounds, here's the Foley, here's the sound design, here's the dialogue, here's the music. Those are all the layers. And then, from there, like you can kind of get an idea of just how much work goes into it. And just how much crafting it requires and how much like a lot of sound design is just really like sonic manipulation, like trying to mess with you in some way or evoke a certain emotion, and is very similar to music in that sense, but I think it doesn't get as much understanding of that from the everyday movie watcher.
I know you're doing most of this in the post end, and so I assume maybe it's been a minute since you've been on set holding a boom mic. Very important question. Mm-hmm. What is the best way to let the crew know it's time for room tone without pissing people off?
It's It's a fight. I mean, part of the reason I stopped doing production stuff was just because it wasn't in my personality to be uh, aggressive about that stuff the way you have to be. And sometimes you have to. Sometimes you got to piss people off and be like, shut up. It's room tone time. Because you got to fight for those things as a sound person. Because if you're lucky, you'll end up with a director who respects and understands what you're doing. I have so much respect for the people that do location recording because it's, the production mixer and the boom operator, all those guys. It's its own other beast. It's its own craft, and it's very difficult to do well. And it's always obvious when it's not done well. But I feel like when people do it incredibly well, like people don't really notice, I guess, or like they don't give it the credit it deserves. So I definitely I feel for my other side of the wall sound brethren, because you basically just have to be a dick. If it was up to me, I'd just have an air horn and then just get everyone to shut up that way, and then do room tone, wait for the reverb of that to like trail away, and then like, all right, shut up now.
Is there something that you haven't done yet, that whether it's production or maybe an achievement, like a type of effect you haven't done, but you're like, ooh, I'd really love to do that? Is there a T-Rex that you dying to mix right now, or something that you haven't done yet?
I don't think anyone will ever surpass Gary Rydstrom for that. But honestly, I want to do more fantasy, more like magic. I've done things that have had like magical elements in them, but I've never done like stuff with like witches and wizards or like Lord of the Rings kind of stuff.
Hobbits, elves.
I'd love to try that because I'm a big fantasy fan. Lord of the Rings is one of my favorite movie trilogies. So I would love to do that. I think that aspect of it specifically too, or Game of Thrones, House of Dragon, that kind of stuff. Paula Fairfield, who's sound designed all of the dragons for both shows, is like, first of all, the coolest person ever. Second of all, like, just so interesting the way that she her process in sound designing dragons is just very, very interesting. Because she comes at it with this creature work in general is like very emotional, like very emotion based, because you have to sort of convey certain emotions with creatures, obviously, right? And like the dragons on both those shows are so complex, and they have their own personalities and they have their own intelligence and all that stuff. So the way that she brings all that across is very cool.
Well, I'm glad you mentioned the dragons, because in the process of editing the sound of a dragon coming together, I have to ask, because on a technical level, because this is that kind of show, a very early effect that I had heard, I think I listened to the audio commentary of dating Triple X, and with Vin Diesel. And I think this was the first instance I had really heard on a commentary somebody talk about the editing and the layering involved. When they mentioned to achieve the sound of this avalanche, there were like 300 tracks or layers. And to me, that is such a hard concept to wrap around. I mean, visually, for visual effects, for me, I know that there's hundreds of layers of elements that I can cram into a frame, and that's visual. How does your mind process all those things? Like, if one of those things is gone on an audio level, do you hear it? Please break down that process for me, because it's all this beautiful alchemy to me that I don't understand, that I want to understand more.
Alchemy is a very good word for it, because it is a little bit nebulous and sort of, and this is where I think the experience part comes in so heavily, because I think the longer you do this job and the more you hear different mixes, different mixers, work with different editors, work with different directors, you hear things and you go, "Well, that sounds really cool. That doesn't sound so great." And you sort of learn from a creative standpoint, you sort of learn what basic things a threshold you need to get to. And then beyond that, it's like, all right, how do I put my own spin on this, right? So there's like certain expectations of certain sounds. So you have to get that out of the way first, because like an avalanche is going to have rumble, right? It's going to have snow. So you like, okay, I've got those two elements. I got my rumble, I got my snow. How can I make this unique though? What else can I add? What other elements can I bring in? And are they in a different frequency range? Are they going to just double up with whatever I've got in here and just make it loud? Because that's another thing that I think is, for me at least, this is a school of thought I have, is that things shouldn't be loud. They should feel big. And those are two different things.
Mm-hmm.
You can blast somebody with volume, but it doesn't mean that you're getting the right energy. And this is a big mantra that we had on Stranger Things as well. I know I keep going back to that, but it's that show has every element of challenge as a sound person, so it's an easy one for me to pick from. But that show specifically, because it's Netflix and because we know the demographic is going to watch mostly on laptops, iPads, iPhones, smaller speaker stuff, you need to make sure that everything that you're making sounds big, even on tiny speakers. And so a lot of that is less about volume, less about bass, and more about what frequencies you're utilizing. So that's a big thing for me, is just like frequency dynamics and figuring out what bandwidth I have to work with. Because the other thing that you have to think about a lot as a sound designer is everything else going on in the scene. So is this a big music moment? Because if it's a big music moment, you might be wasting your time putting anything in the low end, because it's going to get totally blown away by the music. And music's going to usually win that fight. Like if it's between the two of us on a stage, music's always going to win. Learning to work with music and dialogue and knowing where you're sitting in that range between the two, where you can make something interesting. And that's very challenging. That can be very, very challenging. But again, it kind of goes back to this, well, I did this one thing, or I saw, I sat on a stage for this big movie with this mixer and they explained how they did this. So like, maybe I should try that. It's a lot of like throwing things at the wall a lot of the time, even if it's something you've done before, because you want to always try and give it a new spin and make it unique in your own way. So it's like, we've heard a car crash a million times. How can I make this whole thing sound more dynamic and interesting and exciting, right? Because that's the whole point of like a lot of those big scenes, is just to build excitement, and the sound really carries that, that in those moments, that sound is carrying all of that, if not, either all of that on its own or with music.
You bring up things in there that it makes total sense once you hear it, but just never crossed my, like that. First of all, like that you're competing with music, and that there's a competition in a weird way of things like this. What audio elements need to register to better tell the story,
exactly.
Which takes priority in a moment, right?
It's also in my field, it's also really important to do that, because, and I, as a supervisor, I try to when I work with more experienced editors, I don't have to tell them, but if I have newer people, I have to tell them these things just so they're like not wasting their time, because a lot of the time we don't work with our dialogue and music on while we're working. I try to put it on as much as I can so that I can feel whether or not I'm going to actually hear any of the stuff. Because that's the other thing, is like, it's to your benefit to do that, because you want your stuff to play just as much as the music, but you need to do it so it's not butting heads with the music. And so you got to find a way to like finesse it in there and not take up space that the music needs, and not take up space that the dialogue needs, because it's going to be under the dialogue. And so that it's a lot of challenges. Like there's a lot of things to sort of keep in mind while you're doing any given scene, even if it's not like a big, Star Trek, like spaceship battle. Even if it's like two people talking in a room, you have to think about it like, well, how can sound transform this in a way that is giving the director, like, whatever it is that scene is trying to evoke, how can sound help push that into another level so that people feel whatever emotions the director wants them to feel a little bit more, because they're experiencing, like, I'm sure you've watched movies where two people are having a conversation in a diner, and then it suddenly starts to become a more intense conversation, and all the chatter of all the people and like the clinking and all that stuff just sort of falls back, and you're just having the two people talking with each other. And that's kind of like how your brain interprets things. It zeroes in on stuff sonically. You just don't notice it when you're just living your everyday life. But obviously, if you're having an intense conversation with someone, you're not going to hear, the conversation next to you or whatever's going on around you is just going to kind of go into the background because you're focusing on what's going on. So all of that to say, it's really, at the end of the day, it's a sound editor and sound designer's job, sound person in general. It's our job to sort of find out what the emotional core is of a movie and every scene we work on, and then figure out how to service the scene or movie to that cause, essentially.
So I'm curious. So in a vague sense, what's in the future for you? Like, obviously a lot of times when you're working on productions, you're doing things for others. But is there anything of yours that you're like, oh man, this is a soundscape I want to create and no one else is doing it, so I'm just gonna have to do it myself?
Yeah, I think I've had a couple of things percolating for a few years now. It's just one of those things that it always gets to a point where I have to put it down for work. But I would like to do some like narrative podcast type stuff of my own that I've written. Mm-hmm. But again, it's one of those things that I just kind of put it aside for now, just because, right now, like things have been pretty quiet, but up until this, even during the strike, I was working all the time. So, which I was very fortunate to have a job, but so it's been tough to do that. But I think some of my favorite things as far as like side things that I fly in to do sometimes is like sound design stuff that a supervisor or someone will come approach me and be like, can you just come up with ideas for this? And that's actually something I also did on Strange New Worlds, where, it's like the supervisor was like, okay, I need these elements. Can you just spitball stuff? Just make a bunch of stuff. And, here's some ideas, some sort of direction to go in. But that stuff is super fun sometimes because you can just kind of like come in and do the fun part and then just leave. You know what I mean? I like both extremes. I love that, and I love being like day one to the day we deliver the show, and like nothing in between.
Well, I also know that you are a incredibly talented painter. Is that something that that you do just for you, or is that something that you're putting out there as well?
I've definitely in the last few years just been doing painting for myself. I think it's very, it's just a nice, completely separate thing that I can do that has no bearing on anything else in my life. And so I've kind of kept it there for a long time. But I have been thinking of, I've got a few ideas of like sets of paintings I want to do potentially one day for a gallery. It's just one of those things I'm working my way up to. And in the meantime, I'm just painting lots of random crap. I'm like really into miniatures at the moment. So I've started doing a bunch of like miniature stuff because I don't know what it is about tiny things, but they're just so much fun. So I've been doing that as well as painting and just sort of, I think it's really important to have interests outside of what you do for a living, even if it is something you love, because I feel like you learn so many things that way, and it makes you more well-rounded, and it just generally I feel like it's just good for your soul and your mental health to just have something that's just for you that you can kind of just do whenever you've got some free time, which is, for adults not as easy, but but just having that there. Like, if I have a quiet day on the weekend or something, knowing I have that there, or if I'm just like, I'm really stressed out about work, I'm going to go draw something or whatever. It's just a nice thing to have to sort of, blow off steam and just get some creative ideas out there.
Well, you know what I'm hearing from that is that you've got a narrative podcast that you want to make. You're an incredible painter. I see a motion comic in there somewhere, like somewhere in between putting those two worlds together.
There's a comic that I wanted. I've been like, it's again, that's one that's been sitting on the back burner for a very long time. And I make a lot of excuses, but really it's just an energy thing. Like it's so hard to dedicate the amount of energy it would take to put all of it out there, but I'm making excuses, but it's just one of those things. It's like, oh, when I have some free time, I'll do it. And then I never have any free time, so I don't do it.
Yeah. But
that's the thing I like about painting too.
That's a good thing.
Yeah. Painting's nice in the sense that you can kind of do it and get it done. Some paintings take longer than others, but you can kind of bang those things out fairly quickly, whereas like doing an entire story it's a lot of work, and I don't have an editor, so so I hopefully one day.
Last question, and then we're gonna let you go, but it's obviously a Foley question because clearly that's all you do, right? Is Foley, as we've established in this episode.
I'm the footstep queen.
Have you had the opportunity to insert your motorcycle sounds at any point into anything you've worked on?
I haven't, not my motorcycle. I have done some recordings of other people's motorcycles. I just, for whatever reason, I never got around to doing my own. But I think my favorite things that I record is my dogs. And I have my dogs in almost every single movie I've worked on, whether there's a dog in it or not. I find a way to put them in. That's definitely something. And it's also like just a constant, they're just like an endless fountain of like ridiculous sounds because they're French bulldogs. So they're they just make so many weird sounds. So I'll just pull out a recorder and just get gold.
Do you just have a recorder on standby? Like boom,
I've got
ready to go?
Yeah. It's tough sometimes because they now know what it looks like and they'll stop whatever they're doing because they're just like, I'm not like gonna record right now. I'm not camera ready.
My kids do the exact opposite. It's like when they're doing something, when they're doing some cute and adorable and just natural, I'm like, I pull up the phone and then they start mugging. And I'm like, you ruined it. It's not cute anymore. You're
trying too hard.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I need to know though. You just said you put your dogs in everything, even if it doesn't have dogs. Now I need to know in what scenario would you put your dog in something that doesn't have a dog?
I've used them so many times in like creatures and stuff like that. That's my fallback usually, because especially if it's like a cute creature. I did some sound design for this TV show called, not TV show. This movie called Chupa, which was kids movie about a chupacabra, but it's like super cute and it's a baby chupacabra. And so much of that baby is just my dog because he's just making all the weird sounds and you know what I mean?
Oh, that's great. See, now I was, I don't know why my brain didn't just go straight to creature because I'm thinking there's going to be a door opening somewhere that sounds like.
Well, I should do that. I've done that with like farts. That's another one. I don't know. Sound people we're all children.
Oh yeah.
We like to like throw farts into whenever we can. So I put farts into shows where farts were not needed, and sometimes to some lukewarm receptions. Like, oh, I thought you'd think that's funny. Okay.
Right. You think it's funny, and that's what matters.
Exactly.
Well, thank you so much, Katie, for doing this. We really appreciate the time. And this has been just really insightful, getting to know not just all of what you do, but getting to know you even more. Tell the people, where can they find you if they want to look up and see what you're up to?
Instagram, I guess. That's like the only thing that I really use outside of my email. I'm not. I have a TikTok too, but I never post on it. I just like looking at cute animal videos on there.
That's okay. I talk about every week. I tell people to catch me on Threads, and I say one day I'll post something to it.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm not on Threads either. Yeah, I should. I feel like I should. I do post a lot, but it's usually just my dogs. Like I don't.
I don't see a problem with this.
I mean, people love it, so. I'm giving the people what they want. But yeah, Instagram. I think it's Katie_Halliday_86, or just Katie Halliday.
Oh, thanks so much, Katie. Really appreciate everything.
Thank you so much for having me. This was a lot of fun.
That was a great interview, Logan. I had a great time with Katie. She's always a blast to talk to, and she's got so much information about the sound world, because I know absolutely nothing about sound. And anytime I try to know about sound, the only thing I know is keep it between the red and the yellow.
Yeah,
when
don't
you're mixing.
peek. And dear God, don't leave empty space. That's pretty much all I know about sound.
And respect the room tone.
Well, yeah, obviously.
So Logan, where can they find you?
Findable. I'm on Twitter at FilmGuy89, Instagram at FilmGuy1989. I just set up a Threads at FilmGuy1989. I haven't posted anything yet, but I'm there. And you can find me on YouTube doing those table reads weekly. How about you, Jake? Where can they find you?
You can find me and my company at VFX2Go on Instagram, Facebook, TikTok, Threads, and I'm on there too, but one of these days I'll post to it. And our website, www.vfx2go.com.
Hey, Jake!
Yes?
I think we're about to say the same thing.
Yeah.
Hey, Jake, did you
Logan?
know we have a website?
I heard. I think I made it, but okay. Yeah.
Yeah, I hope you did, because I didn't.
Somebody did.
Somebody made it.
And it's at HollywoodUnveiled.com. One of these days we'll figure out how to end the show, Logan.
Ah, shit!